Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, viewers, for joining us with Dr. Shehzad Saleem for this session. I'll request Dr. Yasin for moderating today's program, please.
In the name of God, the most merciful, the most beneficent, we are going to discuss a few more issues that we all need to understand better and better every day. And inshallah, Dr. Shehzad Saleem is going to start with this session. We will keep the question and answers a little short because we tend to run out of time every time. So Dr. Shehzad Saleem, please, whenever you're ready.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear friends, participants, brothers and sisters, daughters and sons. It's always a great pleasure to be in touch with young and vibrant minds. And mind you, when I say young and vibrant minds, doesn't mean that if you're old in age, you don't have a young mind. All of us who are in quest for the truth, everyone who's trying to find out what exactly is the meaning behind certain directives, I suggest, or I would label that person to have a vibrant and a young mind. And so, as I have been discussing all along, that the purpose of these sessions has been to thrash out a lot of issues which we generally face and which at times have been misinterpreted, and at other times they have cultural implications, and we end up discussing them, or at times discussing them in a way that we think that revisiting them or reevaluating them is something that cannot be. So I have been pointing this out all along, that as far as religion is concerned, the text or the nusus are concerned, they are eternal. But interpretation of these nusus or these texts is something which is a human endeavor. And because of the fact that it's a human endeavor, there is always a chance that people might not fully grasp the intention of the creator. So the thought process of understanding and re-understanding the intent of God Almighty is something that has to continue all along. It cannot be a stagnant process. It has to be a dynamic process. And much like the interpretation of the universe, the interpretation of the Quran itself is, as I said, always subject to improvements, revisions, and of course, at times, ratifications. So the things that we would be discussing today, and as you would have gauged from our discussions in the previous sessions, all of them basically relate to some major misconceptions and also some major misunderstandings. So I would like here to present some alternative views, my own views, which I have understood from my teachers and some other scholars. And of course, the purpose here is not to convince you or to make you believe that this is the only interpretation, but the purpose here is that just to present some alternative interpretations with their reasoning, with their arguments, so that you can be in a better position to decide for yourself. So remember, decision is something that is always on the person, or is the onus of it lies on the listener, the person who is trying to understand a particular issue. The things that we would be discussing, as I said, have their roots in culture, they have their roots in understanding, and also they have the roots in the fact that understanding religion is something which most religious scholars think is now a process that has been completed and that cannot be improved upon and that cannot be revisited. So we at our institute here, and the way that we have been trained to discuss and educate on these matters, is that it's always something that we can refresh and revisit. As far as the religion is concerned, there's no such thing as a taboo question. There's no such thing as a forbidden question. Everything that comes to your mind, anything that comes to your intellect, which disturbs you or would require you to search further, is always welcome. And this is how you would attach yourself and have a living relationship with religion. Otherwise, it would never be a relationship in which you would like to find out more. And the more that you go further, the more you would realize, or all of us do realize, that there's so much to learn and there's so much to unlearn. And as some wise men have said, that the biggest learning is actually unlearning. So when we try to find out the truth behind certain things, we need to unlearn some of the facts that we have already been discussing. So today, the topic that we are going to discuss is, I'm just going to share my screen with you. So basically, there are three topics. them is half testimony of women, which is a very common concept amongst religious people who understand Islam, the legalities especially, that the testimony of women or women as witnesses, they just carry half witness in relation to man. And then we have this issue of sexual intimacy with slave women, which is again something which is found in the Quran and which was practiced in the times of the Prophet. And so therefore the question is that, is this something which is allowed by God? Because we tend to believe that the only sexual intimacy that is allowed, so to speak, by the Quran is the one which one has with one's wife. So the third issue again is something which is always staring us in the eye, and that is the issue of 4 wives. Men do at times believe that, or I would say most religious people do believe that 4 wives is something which is encouraged by religion or by the Quran, and therefore if we have this provision which is found in the Quran, then why wouldn't we exercise it more and more? And of course the question does arise that in monogamy and in polygamy, what exactly is this difference, and why exactly is the fact that religion has allowed men to take 4 wives, and alternatively, why is it that wives themselves cannot have 4 husbands, so to speak? So we're going to take up these issues one by one and see how we are able to deal with them. So let's start off with the first issue. I'm going to cite a Quranic text before you, and this Quranic text has been taken from Surah Baqarah, which is the 2nd surah and is the longest surah of the Quran. And this particular verse that you are now seeing being displayed before you is the basis of the view that as far as women are concerned, their testimony is half that of men. So let's start off by reading these verses. These verses say, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu iza tadayantum bidainin ila ajalin musamma faktubuh wal yaktub bainakum katibun bil adl ولا يأب كاتب أن يكتب كما علمه الله فليكتب وليملل الذي عليه الحق وليتق الله ربه ولا يبخس منه شيئا فإن كان الذي عليه الحق سفيها أو ضعيفا. Let me just switch the screen. سفيها أو ضعيفا أو لا يستطيع أن يمل هو فليملل وليه بالعدل واستشهدوا شهيدين من رجالكم فإن لم يكونا رجلين فرجل وامرأتان ممن ترضون من الشهداء أن تضل إحداهما فتذكر إحداهما الأخرى. Okay, let me read the translation of this verse. So remember, this is verse 282, and it is reportedly the longest verse found in the Quran. So the words, it starts off with these words: believers, when you acquire a loan for a fixed period, record it in writing. And let a scribe write it down between you with fairness. And he who can write down should not refuse to write. And just as Allah has taught him to write, he also should write for others. And the one who has acquired the loan should have the document written down, and fearing Allah his Lord, he should not make any reduction in it. If he on whom rests the responsibility of writing is indiscreet or feeble or unable to have it written, then let his guardian do so with justice. And call in. So here is the exact statement of the testimony of women in this background that you have just read. So it starts off from here. And call in 2 male witnesses from among your men. But if 2 men cannot be found, then 1 man and 2 women from among your likable people, so that if one of them gets confused, the other reminds her. So this is where it is mentioned that you call in 2 witnesses all over the document that you have written. And if these 2 witnesses have to be men, but if 2 men cannot be found, then 1 man and 2 women, which would mean that 2 women are going to replace the other man, who was not present. And then it says the reason is أن تضل إحداهما فتذكر إحداهما الأخرى. So that if one of them gets confused or forgets, the other reminds her. So see, this is the text of the Quran, which first of all gives us this impression, or which foremost gives us this impression that perhaps God Almighty wants women to testify alongside men, but that too in the case where two women are equivalent to one man. So let's start off by discussing this text in more detail and see how the exact context is. So, in fact, before I do that, I'd like to also present to you the general understanding which has risen amongst our scholars, our jurists, on the basis of these verses. So, the first thing that our scholars say is that in all cases of circumstantial evidence, which means in all cases in which a crime has been committed, the testimony of a woman would not be accepted in the first place. So they would say that the testimony of a woman would not be accepted at all. So the exception that they make is in the case of testifying on legal documents, on some certain other documents, and that too is made by only certain scholars because this verse explicitly mentions documentary evidence. Other than that, all our scholars, I mean, this exception, if I could just relate to you the name of the person who has pointed out this exception, is Ibn Hazm, a very famous scholar of Spain from the 5th century. So he is the person who says that as far as women are concerned, their testimony shall be accepted even in the case of criminal procedures or in case of crimes. But all of the scholars, they are unanimous that as far as women are concerned, if there is a crime that is going to take place, that has taken place, they will not be accepted as a witness. So thus, for example, if a woman is raped, for example, or if there is a theft or a robbery in a house and the only witness is a woman herself who was either raped, or maybe in the case of robbery or theft, she was the only person who would have witnessed that robbery or theft, then her witness is not admissible. This is the classical view, that her witness is not acceptable. And the reason that they gave, of course, is that the Quran here does not mention the fact that as far as witnessing is concerned, has to do with any criminal procedure. All it mentions is documentary procedure. So the first thing that we need to understand is that as far as these verses are concerned, they relate to documentary evidence. And documentary evidence is something in which each one of us has the option to select witnesses, to select any person whom we would like to have as witness or to choose as a witness on that document, to be someone who can testify over that document. However, in criminal cases, this is not the case. In criminal cases or in crimes, all that we have is circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence would mean that any person who is present at the scene of the crime, he or she would be considered as a witness. So there is a world of difference between the documentary evidence and between circumstantial evidence. As the name itself suggests, the circumstantial evidence relates to evidence which is found at the scene of the crime. And the people who are present there would be classified and regarded as witnesses. In the case of documentary evidence, this is not the case, because in this case, you are able to select the person. You are able to select who you would like to make as witness. So therefore, this is what we call a false analogy. So one of the shortcomings of this analysis or this reasoning of our jurists is that they have made this analogy which does not collocate, because in case of documentary evidence, the witnesses are selected by the person who is making that document. Whereas in the case of circumstantial evidence, this is a selection from God. I mean, it's God who's going to select who's going to be there. So therefore, any law which is made regarding documentary evidence cannot be extended to circumstantial evidence. It's as simple as that, because the nature of this evidence is wholly different. It's totally different. As I said, in one, the selection is made by the circumstances, or in fact by God himself. And in the other, you have the option, you have the discretion, you have the choice and opportunity to select whomever you would like to. So therefore, any person who would like to select any individual as his or her evidence or testimony would be acceptable. So the thing that has to be noted in the first place. In the second place, my dear participants and my dear listeners and viewers, another thing that needs to be realized is that these verses do not have any legal import. They do not address, for example, a court of law, and they do not tell a court of law that if some criminal case is presented to them, then witnesses have to be presented in such and such a manner, or this is the procedure, or these are the number of witnesses. On the contrary, as you can see, and because I just read out these verses before you, these verses start off at the beginning by addressing Muslims themselves in their personal capacities, in their own personal dealings. And these verses say, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu iza tadayantum bidainin. So believers, when you secure a loan for a certain period of time, then write it down. So therefore, the second thing that is important is that these particular verses are not addressing a court of law. It is not telling a judge, for example, that if there is a case that has come to him in which there are women who are two in number in place of a man, then they can accept this witness. This is not the case. What we are being told here in this particular Quranic verse is that as individuals, in order to safeguard any problems, in order to safeguard any bothers that we might have, we need to jot down our agreement. And by jotting it down, we must have it testified, we must have it witnessed, so that there is not a problem in case there is a dispute later on. So summing up, we can say that these Quranic verses absolutely have nothing to do with criminal cases. They don't have any relation to any sort of punishment which requires an evidence as far as crimes are concerned. So therefore, the general understanding of our jurists cannot be accepted that women as witnesses cannot be allowed. So precisely this understanding had been presented much earlier on, so many centuries ago, almost 6-7 centuries ago, by Ibn Taymiyyah and his student Ibn Qayyim. So both of them said that these verses do not relate to any evidence of women regarding criminal procedure. And at the same time, they had also said that this is not something which relates to a court of law. They are basically verses which address us in a personal capacity. Similarly, we have some other critique which has been presented by worthy scholars. And one of them, of course, is the fact which is presented by Ibn al-Hammam, a famous jurist. And he said that, look, if we are required to present women as witnesses, then what about hadiths which have been transmitted by one woman? And for example, in the case of a companion, it could be a sahabiya, it could be the wife of a prophet, and she's solely transmitting a single report. And if ever there needs to be an evidence regarding a certain saying of the prophet, then that sahabiya or that wife of the prophet is actually acting as a witness. And on the one hand, we accept all women as narrators of hadith if they are single in their narration, if there's no one else standing alongside them. And of course, if this was the case, then our jurists would never have accepted the testimony of either of these women and would have insisted that at least two women should have transmitted a hadith. So therefore, he criticized this view and said that this is again a misunderstanding. As far as women witnesses are concerned, we need to understand that it has been left to the discretion of a society. And here in particular, the Arab society was in discussion in this particular verse, in which women were generally not used to such things. They were not used to going to testifying on these documents. And so therefore, there is a chance that if one of them got confused or was overawed by the situation, the other one, which would be alongside her, would remind her. So it was basically in this scenario, a more of a cultural, a social instruction given in the social milieu, in the social ambience of the society of Arabia, in which women were generally not used to going to the courts and to testifying. So if I sum up, I can say that this is an instance of gross misinterpretation of this Quranic verse. This Quranic verse does not at all say that women cannot testify in case of crimes. It does not say that even in case of documentary evidence, it has to be two women. In the case of documentary evidence, It is particularly, as I said, a verse which addresses us in our personal capacities, and to the foremost addressees of the times of the Prophet. Of course, it addresses them in their personal capacity, and because in their own personal capacity, in their own society, this was an issue that could have caused some problem and some debate. So the Almighty gave this option to people that if they would like to involve women, then let there be two, because of course this is the case in case of issues where women are not used to certain tasks. So today, for example, if a woman gets raped, or if anything happens and she is the sole witness, or there could be some other witnesses beside her as well, then it is left to the discretion of the judge to decide whether a particular testimony, whether a particular evidence is admissible or not. So in all, we can say that the Quran does not at all limit, or it confines testimony, or it confines evidence to women, and that too in a way that has been generally presented that they are half witnesses. As I said, these verses have a specific background. These verses relate to people in their personal capacity. Again, in a society where women were in such a situation that they could have faltered in case they had testified. And that too, we have to understand that the guidance of the Quran was specifically about documentary evidence, regarding evidence which is written down. It does not give any guidance regarding circumstantial evidence. So if we analyze certain things regarding documentary evidence and extend them to circumstantial evidence, we would be making an error, a gross error, because, as I said, in the case of circumstantial evidence, the selection is made by God, and in the case of documentary evidence, you have the choice to make the selection. So any law which is made on the first cannot be regarded as analogous to the second situation because of its nature. So as far as testifying is concerned, in all criminal cases, in all documentary cases, it is all in all left to the discretion of the judge. He has complete authority in accepting a witness or rejecting it. The Quran, as I said, as far as it is concerned, it does not specify anything as a matter of law, either regarding circumstantial evidence or regarding documentary evidence. In both of them, it has given us complete leverage. So I would end my talk here regarding this issue, and would welcome any questions before we move on to the next topic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shehzad Saleem, for taking up such a difficult subject, a very controversial issue. AZ has raised a hand. Please go ahead and ask your questions, please.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam.
Sir, my question is, sir, in this particular verse, is there any reference or anywhere else about the nature of the witnesses other than the gender, sir? Witness agar choose karna hai, to what should be the qualifiers?
I mean, this verse itself speaks out this difference. It says, "Mimman tardawna," which means that people who are likable among you, people who are qualified for this, people who are honest. You see, the word tardawna in Arabic encompasses all those traits which are essential for a witness. Then he should be a truthful person. He should not be a person who's forgetful. He could qualify for someone who could divulge a matter in a very discreet way, in a very precise way. So the Quran has given us this leverage that people who are able to testify in a way that their testimony bears no discrepancies or no confusions, you can select them. So regardless of gender, the word "mimman tardawna" is a general word which guides us regarding this selection.
And sir, it also says, if I've read the translation correctly, it says choose the witnesses from among your men.
Mm-hmm.
What could you please explain that, sir? What does it mean, your men?
And it means amongst yourselves, people that you know, people you are acquainted with, and it's not just men. It says amongst you, amongst yourselves. So I mean, this is something which all of us would do. That I would select a witness which I know, on whom I can rely upon, who is well known to me. So just a general statement which tells us that, well, when you're going to select someone, he better be someone who is known to you, so that if there is any problem regarding any dispute that might arise later on, you're able to catch that person. So it's like saying it. He should be among you. He should be known to you. He should be well qualified for this task. So there's nothing. There's no overtone that you need to sort of gauge from it.
Except the reason why I'm asking is because generally it is perceived people generally say here that if you are choosing witnesses, they have to be Muslims. Does that in any way?
It does not. It does not. Any witnesses, regardless of gender and regardless of faith, there is no such specification anywhere in the Quran, and even in Hadith. So therefore, if you find any crime being committed and that crime has been witnessed by non-Muslims or people who have different faiths, so as I said, it's not the issue. It's not at all an issue of faith. It's an issue of testifying something in a clear way, in a manner in which a judge can be satisfied. It relates more to one's intellect and to one's memory rather than to one's faith or gender. So anyone who qualifies, in fact, let me also elaborate a little more, and that is that even in cases where there are witnesses, where witnesses are not present, physically not present, camera reports, DNA reports, CCTV footages, all of these are equally competent as witnesses, and cases can be decided on the basis of these instruments. So another thing which I would elaborate here, which has just come to my mind as a result of your question, is that our jurists do not generally accept DNA reports and some of the other advancements that have now arisen. There are specific areas or specific countries where some jurists do make this exception, but by and large, general religious clergy, they do not accept anyone as witness except if he is a human in human form. So we do need to revisit this as well, because there is no such restriction in the Quran anywhere. The Quran wants the witness or the evidence to be given in a manner that it is clearly transmitted, clearly transferred to the judge or the person who's making a decision, so that he has the information on the basis of which he has to decide.
Many thanks. We have a question in the chat. Is there any hadith or ayah in the Quran quoted by the ulamas regarding the half testimony of the women, or is this the only ayah that is quoted by them?
This is the only place in the Quran where it has been actually explicitly mentioned. There is one other verse, but that verse is not explicit, and there is this verse in which it says that whenever you have to indict prostitutes, then it has to be 4 people among you. But the way that 4 people has been mentioned, some of our jurists interpret that they refer to men. However, as I said, linguistically, it is not possible to just confine this witness to men, but that would be a slightly more technical discussion. If you would like to engage more into it, I think I can do it and privately maybe, or on an email, because it relates to certain Arabic constructions.
Many thanks, sir. There's one more question. Since you mentioned taking the traditional concept of one narrator of a hadith, the question is any hadith which was only narrated by one al-Mu'mineen, then what is the criteria for traditional scholars? Do they accept or do they reject?
There are several narratives which have been narrated by a single mother of the faithful, Aisha, Salama, or Hafsa, and there are many of them. And our jurists our muhaddisun accepted them. So you remember, you have to bifurcate between the two disciplines. One is the jurisprudence, and the other is hadith. So juristically, people do not accept women as witnesses, but our hadith scholars, they have accepted women as witnesses. And when they are posed this question, well, that you are relying on a single woman as witness, they say that because we have those 6 criteria of judging a narrative, and any person who qualifies for that, and they give those criteria as, first, that the person has to be an honest person. Secondly, he has to have a sound memory. And then there are certain other criteria. So anyone who qualifies this criteria, according to them, is a sound person. So this question has been taken up by our jurist scholars, by jurists. It's not by the muhaddisun. So because of the fact that these are 2 separate disciplines, So you cannot find an opinion at times which does have a which does collocate with one another. There is a clash between these disciplines, and in most cases, as I said, this is just a question that has been raised, and people dismiss it by saying, "Well, that's a different discipline. It's a matter of reporting a hadith, and this is a different discipline. It's a matter of testifying in a crime." So they take these two things as separate. Whereas I think personally that I mean, if you go into more detail or in more depth, they are in fact not very much different, because when you're relaying a report from the Prophet, it is at times much more important because it is something which you are ascribing to the Prophet. So if a single woman is ascribing something to the Prophet and transmitting it to later generations, and if she's being relied upon and trusted, so this does raise the question, and this question should be posed to the jurists who do not accept this. I mean, the Ibn al-Hammam, when he raised this question, he actually posed this question to people who were not accepting the fact that women can be taken as single witnesses.
Many thanks, sir. Now we can go up to the next topic. Thank you.
Okay. Now, the next topic is another very interesting and a very controversial topic at times, and that is the general understanding of Muslim scholars is that if there is a war between some other countries, a non-Muslim country or non-believers, then if you capture slaves, particularly those prisoners of war are women, then they can be made as slaves and they can be distributed among the Muslim army or other people, and men can have sexual intimacy with these with these women who have been caught in these in this particular war that has ensued. And even today, there are people who think that this is a practice that has been condoned by the Quran. So therefore, we do find this happening even today in the jihad, which has been being conducted by ISIS or the likes of them. So Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, as you know, who's the person who's responsible for that, he has condoned this, and there are several other people who accept this. And even if there are people who might not be practically indulging into it, but they are ones who support this fact. And I do remember when I was studying in my university, one of my teachers, a Stanford educated professor of physics, I remember one fine day he came up in our class and he said, "Well, if there is a war between India and Pakistan, I'm going to make Indira Gandhi as my slave, and I'm going to have," I mean, you can understand what he meant. And all of us were absolutely shocked, because for us, it was something that we thought that is confined to the religious mindset. And he was a professor who was not a very religious person. He was a very common person, a common man. But you see, such strongly rooted is this idea of slavery that even a Stanford educated professor teaching physics, he had this inclination of enslaving someone and having intimacy. So therefore, we need to address this question, and we need to find out what the truth is. Does Islam really support slavery? And is it something that is in practice today? If it is being practiced, is it something which is being ratified by the Quran or not? So the bottom line here that we need to understand is that Islam, or the Quran, I would say, when the Quran was being revealed, it inherited this inhuman institution of slavery. It was not that slavery was something which was started by Islam, or it was in practice at the time that the Quran was being revealed. It was an age-old practice. There were scores and scores of slave men and women found in the houses of all people, and they would do all kinds of chores, and they were at the liberty of their masters, who would actually exploit them a lot. So Islam inherited this inhuman institution of slavery, and what it did was that it gradually eradicated it from the society, because so deep were its roots in the society that an immediate order of eradication would have resulted in a lot of chaos, because generally these slave ladies or these slave maidens, they had taken up to prostitution, and had they been released or liberated immediately, they would have no place to go except open up these prostitution dens. And at the same time, there were many slave women who had gone past their age, they were very old, and they would have no place to go. So realizing the fact that this was a very deep problem, a problem that had infiltrated deeply into the society, the Quran adopted a gradual procedure of elimination. And it could have eliminated slavery immediately, but it didn't do so because of the fact it was so deeply rooted. And because it made this gradual eradication, so there was a time in which slavery was allowed. Obviously, when you make a gradual eradication, that would mean that there would be a time in which it is allowed, and slowly and surely it is put to an end. Now, the Quranic verses which were given in that temporary period in which slavery was allowed were unfortunately interpreted as a permanent directive. So there are verses in the Quran which tell us that you can have intimacy with your wives illa ala azwajihim aw ma malakat aymanuhum, which means that you can have intimacy with your wives and with your slave women. So when people read these verses in the Quran, and of course they did see the Prophet and the Sahaba, indulging in this practice, the simple conclusion that they made was this is an ongoing practice, and the Quran actually allows slavery. So on the other hand, we can clearly see, and I will just demonstrate before you how the Quran has made this special effort in eradicating slavery. And unfortunately, even after this Quranic directive, we find that in the times of the rightly guided caliphate, of course, this was clearly adhered to. But right after the rightly guided caliphate, maybe 30 or 40 years after the Prophet had passed away, the practice of slavery, or the inhuman institution of slavery, it once again got back on its feet, and it became very prominent in the society. And it was not until the last century when it was actually prohibited or totally eradicated. So it existed for so long, and we also know that during these times, princes and our monarchs, they had slave maidens, and they did have intimacy with them. But the question is that was it sanctioned by the Quran or not? So I'm going to make a case against it and present to you that the Quran itself, in fact, is presenting an entirely different picture. And the picture it is presenting is that slavery was being gradually eradicated. And because of this gradual eradication, as I said, for a time, it actually tolerated slavery. And because of the fact it tolerated slavery, people thought that this is something of a permanent nature. Now, the two things that need to be, first of all, or initially, or at the very outset, be understood. One of them is that there were two sources of slavery in those times. So one of them was the slave markets in which slaves would be bought and sold. And the other one were these wars which took place, and people were captured in these wars and they were made slaves. So look what the Quran did. First of all, it said that no new slaves would be made, because the first battle which took place between the Muslims and the non-believers was the Battle of Badr. And at this instance, the Quran revealed this famous verse, which is in Surah Muhammad, which says that you cannot enslave any prisoner of war. Imma mannam ba'du, imma fida. You have to liberate them. You have to set them free, either with ransom or without ransom. You just cannot capture any prisoner of war as slave. So what the Quran did was that on the first account, it stopped the opportunity of making any more slaves through these wars. And in the second, it made a gradual effort to eradicate the slavery for slaves which were already present in those houses. So you see, it was a two-pronged approach. No new slave could be made. All prisoners of war had to be set free either through ransom or without ransom. And secondly, already existing slaves which were found in these households, a strategy of gradual emancipation for them was evolved by the Quran. Now look at the measures which the Quran has given in various instances, and of course the Prophet himself in his hadith. So first of all, we find a tremendous appeal in the Meccan surahs. For example, in Surah Balad, it says Fakku Rakaba, which means release the necks of the people. You have enslaved them. You have no right to make them your slaves. They have been created as free individuals, and no human being has a right to enslave them. So there was a very strong appeal made in the very initial period of Mecca, when there were, of course, no wars between Muslims and the non-believers. In the Meccan period, there was a huge appeal, as a result of which we know that the Sahaba who had slaves, they liberated as many as they could, and as many as they could, and the ones that were generally left with them were the ones who themselves did not want to go, or they themselves wanted to stay because they had spent a lifetime with their masters and owners, and they had no place else to go. So most of them were the ones who were remaining. And this tremendous appeal, of course, was not to be taken as an obligation, but it was taken as a huge appeal. So as a result of this, we find that the Quran had this motivation given to Muslims that they should liberate as much slaves as they can. Then the second directive, which was given by the Prophet himself, was that the standard of living of these slaves should be the same as your own standard, as the standard of their masters. The purpose being that it should become so difficult to maintain a slave that they had to be set free. So, for example, what we would wear, or what the masters would wear, or what they would eat, or what they would clothe themselves with, it was made obligatory that the same standard of living should be offered to the slave, so that it would become difficult to maintain them and people would set them free. And then we have the Quran telling us, I'm sure you would be remembering so many verses in which the Quran tells us that to atone for your sins, for example, in unintentional murder, in the case of zihar, in the case of many other crimes that are committed by people, one way to atone for that crime would be to set free slaves. So this again tells us how the Quran actually wanted this institution to end. But at first, the effort made by the Quran was of the nature of an appeal, of the nature of inducing people to do so themselves. So this was another arrangement made. And then the Quran actually told their masters that they should marry off these slave men and women with each other, so that this marriage could raise their status and they would become contributing individuals in the society. And instead of living as single individuals or as prostitutes, for example, in the case of women, they are able to marry and live chaste lives. So the masters were encouraged to marry off their slave men and women. And the next step the Quran took was even more revolutionary. The Quran said that free men or free women who are not able to find free men and women to marry, they can marry among slaves. So another step that was taken was that in order to raise their standard, in order to make them more acceptable, people were encouraged to marry amongst these slaves, so that they would become wives or husbands, and in this way they would become equal in status to other individuals in the society. And then the Quran took another step, and that was that it made a whole head in the Baitul Mal, or the public treasury. Wafir Riqab are the words used by the Quran, which means that people should use this fund, or the rulers should use this fund from the public treasury, buy off slaves and set them free. So you see, there was a whole head that had been created in the public treasury, from which wealth was taken and the slaves would be bought and set free. Again, the purpose was to tell people that this is what the purpose of the Quran is, that ultimately they have to be set free. Fornication was regarded by the Quran to be a prohibition. We know that in Surah Nur, fornication was made a culpable crime. And we know that most of the prostitutes, or most of the women at the times of the Prophet who were slaves and were of the same age, or the age in which, of course, this intimacy can take place, their masters would use them as prostitutes. And because of the fact that fornication was prohibited, it was again something that put a stop to that prostitution, or the intention was to put a stop to that institution of fornication or adultery, which was going on unchecked between these slave women and, of course, their masters. And then another very interesting step that was taken was that the name of slave men and women was eradicated, and it was replaced by the Quran by two different words. So therefore, the word abd and amma, which means a slave man, or a slave man and a slave woman, respectively, was replaced by two different words. One of them was fata and fatat, which would actually mean a man and a woman. So a slave man and a slave woman, the society was told that they should not be called by this name. The word slave must not be part of the name. So the name was replaced, or this noun was replaced by a man or a woman. Instead of being called a slave man or a slave woman, they had to be called man and woman. And then, as I said, finally, in the time of Medina, when the whole Muslim state was set up, and the time for the first war came, which is the Battle of Badr, it was made incumbent upon people that they have to set free all slave or all prisoners of war. They cannot enslave them. So you see, all these 6 or 7 or 8 directives which were given in one line, they were mostly of the nature of an appeal, mostly of the nature of inducing Muslims to set free these slaves, were given in a way that existing slaves would be set free, all those who wanted to have themselves set free, and no other new slave would be made, because Surah Muhammad, which was revealed at the time of Battle of Badr, actually stopped people from making any more slaves from those prisoners of war. And then finally, look what happened. And I'm just going to cite that verse for you from the Quran, which tells us that the Almighty actually gave this order that after these gradual measures, if any slave wanted himself or herself to be set free, to be emancipated, then no master, then no owner had the right to stop him or her. If he or she would give that guarantee that she would do a chore in the society or make some payment in lieu of that, which could actually ensure that he or she would not become an economic burden on the society, but a contributing individual. So look what the Quran has told us, which was the last nail in the coffin of slavery, I would say. It eradicated slavery. It gave the slaves themselves the chance to have themselves set free. They became masters of their own destiny, so to speak. So the Quran actually, let me just cite that verse before you. So this is verse 33 of Surah Nur, the 24th Surah. It says, وَالَّذِينَ يَبْتَغُونَ الْكِتَابَ مِمَّا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ فَكَاتِبُوهُمْ إِنْ عَلِمْتُمْ فِيهِمْ خَيْرًا وَآتُوهُمْ مِمَّا لِلَّهِ الَّذِي آتَاكُمْ. And if any of your slaves asks for mukatabat, give it to them if you know any good in them, and for this give them out of the wealth which Allah has given to you. So if you just concentrate on this word mukatabat, which is in the Arabic, you can see the word al-kitab, which it meant that any slave who would give this guarantee that he or she would not become an economic burden on the society, and of course the masters or the owners, as the verse says, in alimtum fihim khaira, if they also see that they are able to become contributing individuals, then they cannot stop this. So in other words, this was the last and final directive given by the Quran, in which it was no longer an appeal. You see, all previous directives were of the nature of an appeal, of the nature of inducing people, urging them. Finally, after maybe 10 or 15 years, it gave this final directive that whoever amongst these slaves wants to get free, wants to set himself or herself free, then no one can stop him. No owner has the authority to stop him. So as a result, what happened was that only those slaves now remained amongst those households who themselves never wanted to go out, or they never wanted to have themselves set free, because as understandably they had spent a lifetime in those houses, in those households, and had become part of the family, and they thought that they were being properly looked after. But as far as sexual intimacy is concerned, you can clearly see that the Quran has told us that as far as this intimate period, this interim period is concerned, this transitory period is concerned, it is only in this that it is allowed. Once this final directive had been revealed, after that, they had to be set free at all cost. So clearly you can see that how unfortunate it is that a religion which was sent down to eradicate slavery is now a religion about whom people think that it actually patronizes slavery. So what we need to understand is that the root cause of this misunderstanding are the verses in the Quran which say that you can have intimacy with your slaves. And as I said, these are the verses which were revealed during the time when that interim period was still in vogue, that transient period in which slavery was still given protection, because remember, it was being gradually eradicated. This gradual eradication has to be understood. And if this gradual eradication is understood, you will realize that this gradual eradication needed that slavery should be given protection for that particular time. So what unfortunately happened was that these verses, which were meant to be temporary, which were actually meant to be verses which were telling us that during this interim period, you can have intimacy with your wives and with these slave women. They were thought to be eternally allowed, and hence people actually thought that it was the practice, since the Prophet himself had a slave maiden who was Maria the Copt. It's a very famous incident that he had this slave woman as her slave, and from her the Prophet even had a son, Ibrahim, who died in his infancy. So when the people thought that, well, if the Prophet is someone who had done this and he did not liberate Maria, or Mary, as you can call her, so therefore this is something that even other people can do in following him. And of course, that was another cause of misconception. If you have a question, I'll try to answer that as well. But just to sum up, I can just say that as far as slavery is concerned, it is something which Islam or the Quran eradicated in the times of the Prophet, in the lifetime of the Prophet. It just had that gradual elimination strategy adopted. And because this gradual elimination strategy was not properly perhaps understood, people have still, or they still ascribe slavery to Islam. And as you can see today, all our clergy, all our Muslim scholars are almost unanimous. There are very few exceptions. There are people who unanimously think that even today, if there is a war between a non-Muslim country, then their women can be captured and they can be made slaves and used for this purpose. But as I said, this is something which is a very contrary understanding. The Quran does not support it. You can clearly see that the Quran actually wanted to liberate these slaves right from the start. The only thing was that since slavery was so deeply rooted in the Arab society, that an immediate order of its annulment would have created havoc in the society. So a gradual strategy was adopted, and this gradual strategy, unfortunately, came to be understood as a permanent feature of Islam. So with these words, I end my talk on this particular topic and would welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shehzad. Our first question is Asar. Asar, please go ahead.
Sir, first question relating to the previous topic. Sir, in that particular verse 282, it says the onus is on Allah wants the person who is taking the loan to dictate. Sir, is there any specific purpose in that?
I mean, you see, it's a very natural and common sense that because it's my, I am the person who is acquiring that loan, and I am the person who has taken the initiative. I am the person in need. So I think it's very natural that the responsibility of having it written down should be given to the person who is initiating the whole process. You see, my need is initiating the whole process. And so therefore, I think it was very befitting that the Almighty imposed this responsibility on the person who actually had initiated the whole process.
So the reason why I'm asking this is because under the present circumstances, it is generally the banks who dictate terms to the. It is a lender who is dictating the terms to the borrowers. It should be the opposite.
So you see, as I said, it's in the case of the Arab society. It was basically this verse does not relate to any banking institution or anything which relates to institutional funding. Basically, it was a memorandum between two parties. It was a memorandum between two individuals in a society. It doesn't relate to an institutional lending. That is entirely different thing, and of course, that is something that has been in practice today and is absolutely fine. This is related to two individuals in a society. In the Arab arena or in the Arab background or milieu in which this whole directive is being given. So I would say that the banking does not come under its ambit. That's an entirely different thing. That's an institutional lending, and that institutional lending has its own importance as well. So that should not be related to the lending which was going on amongst people in Arabia as individuals.
But sir, as two, considering a bank and a borrower as two parties, wouldn't the principle remain the same?
As I said, you see, this directive. First, you need to understand that this directive is given to Muslims in their personal capacity. It's a personal directive given to two Muslims who are borrowing and lending from one another. it does not relate to an institutional lending in which there are certain rules. And if, for example, you think that these verses do relate to institutional lending, then again, this is something which relates to the norms of the society. If the norms of the society are something in which the lending institution is the one who's taking the responsibility of dictating, that is absolutely fine. I mean, the Quran has just given an option or a proposal in the Arab society in which a particular culture was being followed, because this directive in itself is a cultural directive, it's a social directive. It's nothing of the legal. It doesn't have any legal import. So therefore, even if it is accepted that it is something between an institution and an individual, even then I would say it is something which relates to the norms and societal culture, and it would vary from era to era. It would vary from society to society. It has no legal implication.
Right. So
Many thanks, sir.
Sir, second question relating to the present topic only. Sir, the issue about Hazrat Maria Kiptiya. Could you please elaborate?
So you see, the Prophet, this was this transient period in which she was his slave or slave lady, and there had to be someone who would present before Muslims an example of how, in the interim period, slaves or slave women should be treated. And I think one of the reasons that she was not liberated by the Prophet, there were other reasons as well. One of the reasons that I understand is that for this temporary period, there had to be some example that if you need to keep a slave, then she should be kept in such a way. And you can see from Sira books, from Hadith studies, from various other sources, that virtually she had the same status as the wife. I mean, she would be dealt with by the Prophet as if she was his wife. What I mean to say is that she was not dealt as a slave maiden in a derogatory way or looked down upon, but she was given this highest status. Only thing is, the Prophet never married her, because he wanted to present this example before other Sahaba and other men who had slave women, that until they are set free totally, then they have to be dealt in a very fair way, in a very elaborate way, and kept in high esteem. And one of the other reasons that comes to my mind is that, of course, she was gifted by the king of Egypt, Makaukas. So what would happen if the Prophet would have set her free? She might not have any place to go. I mean, she was a total alien to the land of Arabia. So when you set some people free, or you set free a slave or a slave woman or a slave man, he or she knows the society. He or she is able to go somewhere and have some sort of refuge. But it is very unlikely that in the case of Maria, she would have a place to go, because her own home was actually Egypt, which was several thousand miles away. So I think both these reasons, but to me, the first reason is most important, that the Prophet wanted to set an example that even if during this interim period a slave had to be kept, then this is the way that a slave should be kept. He set that example.
Thank you, sir.
Many thanks, sir. Next question is from Rohan. Rohan, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
All right, thank you. Sir, I wanted to ask that as Quran wanted the slaves to be freed at one time or another, and Hazrat Maria could not be freed because of the reasons you told, don't you think that the Prophet might have actually married her or should have married her?
No, because there is no evidence of this, and the Prophet himself actually was given this option. I mean, he knew that he had an option to marry someone, and he did not marry slave women. And the other thing is that he was actually stopped from marrying slave women who were gifted to him. If you read Surah Ahzab, you'll find out that the only slave women who were allowed to be married by the Prophet were the ones who were caught in a war. And for them, out of their own consent, if they wanted to marry the Prophet. So we know that he married Safiya and Javeria, two of his wives, as a result of those wars. But they had to be individuals who were caught in a war. So for gifts, you can see the Surah Ahzab had actually explicitly stopped him, that he could not marry any gifted slave lady. Any slave lady was gifted to him. Right. You'll find it right in the end of Surah Ahzab's specific verses.
Right. So what you mean to say is that during that time, if there was a slave you have and she doesn't want to leave you, you can keep her and be intimate, right?
No. You cannot be. I mean, if you had to set her free. You just cannot. If you catch a prisoner of war, that prisoner of war cannot be made slave unless. I mean, you have to set that prisoner of war free, whether she's a man or a woman. That's what I've been saying all along. Surah Muhammad tells us that whichever whichever prisoners of war you catch in a war, you have to set them free. Once you set them free, they become free men and free women. Then, out of their own consent, if they would like to marry between the conquering army, then that is fine. Otherwise, they could not be forced to do so, nor was it an obligation. So this is an entirely different scenario. I mean, they had to be set free at all cost. They could not have become intimate with them.
The thing that is interesting me is that Hazrat Maria was not released and not married to, but she lived with the Prophet. So
as a slave lady.
All right. So next question is from Abdul Rahman. Abdul Rahman, please go ahead.
Sir, the question is that what are the political decisions made by the fourth righteous caliphs after the Prophet to end slavery?
I mean, they didn't need to make any further decisions. The directives had already been in place in the times of the Prophet himself. The Quran was explicit, and as I just cited that verse of Surah Nur, which is the 24th Surah, it tells us that any slave who wanted himself or herself to be set free, he was absolutely allowed to do so on a certain condition. So, I mean, all those directives which needed for liberation of slavery or emancipation of slaves had already been given in the time of the Prophet of the Quran. So the Sahaba or the later people just needed to have them practiced. It is only that perhaps because of certain misunderstanding from these Quranic verses and from the practice of certain people, that later people or later, I must say, people who came along after the rightly guided caliphate, they thought that slavery is something which is allowed by the Quran. It was a gross misconception. It's much like the case of Amruhum Shura Bainahum. We know that the process of consultation was adopted in the first four, during the time of the first four caliphs. But later on, Amir Muawiyah, I mean, he could not continue with that, although he might be having a rationale for that. He might be having a certain reason for that. But we do know that right after the Caliph Ali, the directive of consultation was no longer actually invoked. And for a very long period of time, for almost 12 or 13 centuries, we had monarchies. And the directive of the Quran of Amruhum Shura Bainahum was sidelined. So in a very similar way, the directive of the Quran regarding the emancipation of slaves, it was in practice in the times of the Prophet, it was in practice in the times of the rightly guided caliphate, and somehow after that, just as monarchy replaced democracy or consultation, slavery replaced all those directives in which slavery was actually prohibited.
Many thanks.
Sir, here, any of the our traditional narrative ulamas have any kind of viewpoint of that they say that slavery is not in case of war, and it is not totally allowed for us.
Of course, I mean, I don't find any traditional scholars who are against it. As far as I have studied, I would say 99% of our scholars, they are in favor of slavery, and they still think that if there is going to be a war, then slaves can be made out of those prisoners of war. This is their stated. I mean, this is what they state and they say in their lectures. You can just pick up any person. You can find out from any local scholar. You just go to a local mosque, or pick up any book of Islamic law regarding the prisoners of war. You will find that this is the case.
Next question is by Ahmed Wattu. Ahmed Sahab, please go ahead.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Sir, from this side of concept, it's look like actually Islam gave rise to the slavery and women. But in Surah An-Nas, there is actually another concept. There is a people of Quraysh actually praising Deviya. So who's this Deviya? Who's this Deviya? Who actually, it's look like two things are contradicting. Like from Islam is saying we give rights, but another side is actually the people are actually love and praising women too much. They actually make same as go when praising them. So who are these Deviya? I never actually get that.
Can you cite the verse that you're referring to? What verse? What verse of Surah Nas? I don't see any verse in Surah Nas saying so.
One minute. I have to find it. I will let you. I will put it in the chat. Also, I saw in in Al Bayan. I will put it in chat.
Okay.
Just 1 minute.
Many thanks. So next question is from Mariam. Mariam, please go ahead.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Saleem. Sorry, I got a bit confused. So so Prophet Muhammad never had an intimate relationship with Maria? Is that what you meant?
No, I didn't say that. He had a child from her who's called Ibrahim. He did have an intimate relation with her. That's what I said. He said, I did say that she was gifted to him by the king of Egypt, and the Prophet graciously accepted that gift, and he was intimate with her, of course, and that is how Ibrahim was born.
Okay, but if the slave herself wanted to set herself free, or wanted to be free, then he should have set her free.
Yes, of course, that was the case. And in a certain period, after a certain period of time had elapsed, and it was clearly evident that these women had kept themselves chaste as well, and they wanted to set themselves free. Then they had to give a certain guarantee, and after that, no one could have stopped them.
Okay, thank you.
Many thanks. We have one question from Facebook, and the question is, can you please verify that in the laws after the Prophet's life, after these verses were revealed, no women were taken as slaves?
Yes, of course, I can. If you can give an example. I mean, there is all the wars that took place in the times of the rightly guided caliphate. There is not a single instance in which this happened. There are certain instances in which people were actually executed as an exception, but that is because of war crimes and because of the fact that they were active adversaries, and after the conclusive communication of truth to them, they were put to death. I mean, there were 3 or 4 people who were executed in spite of the fact that this was something which is not the norm. But as far as women slaves are concerned, except there are certain instances in which slave women who were caught, I mean, they were originally as slaves, and they were distributed among the army, and the purpose was to wait for their owners to come and fetch them. So this happened in the case of the Ghazwa of Banu Mustaliq, and some of the other wars as well. You can see the details, but it never happened that in the times of the rightly guided caliphate that women were actually taken as prisoners of war and made permanent slaves.
Many thanks, sir. We can go ahead for the next topic. Thank you.
Okay. So the next topic relates to the issue of 4 wives, and this again is an issue that is often discussed, and I mean it is something that all of us need to understand. What exactly is the purpose of the Quran when it says that 4 wives can be taken by a Muslim husband? So before I just start off to explain this whole topic, let me just cite before you the relevant Quranic verses, which actually have been taken to mean that men need 4 wives, or it's their physical need to have 4 wives. Okay, so let me cite this verse to you. So these are verses 3 and 4 of Surah Nisa, the 4th surah of the Quran. It says, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ ورباع فإن خفتم ألا تعدلوا فواحدة أو ما ملكت أيمانكم ذلك أدنى ألا تعولوا وآتوا النساء صدقاتهن نحلة فإن طبن لكم عن شيء منه نفسا فكلوه هنيئا مريئا. So it says, and if you fear that you shall not be able to deal justly with the orphans, marry their mothers who are lawful to you, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. But if you fear that you shall not be able to deal justly with them, then only one, or those which your right hand possesses, which of course leads to, it refers to the slave women that we have just discussed. That will be more suitable to prevent you from doing injustice, and give these women their dowers also the way dowers are given. But if they of their own good pleasure remit any part of it to you, take it and consume it gladly. So this is the verse, my dear viewers. If you concentrate on the text of the Quran, it says that if you are unable to do justice with the orphans, then you can marry their mothers who are lawful to you, and amongst those mothers there could be 2 or 3 or 4 in number. So it is on the basis of this Quranic verse that people think that the Quran actually encourages Muslim men to marry 4 wives or to take up 4 wives. So, just to give you a background of the scheme of God, the way it has been mentioned in the Quran, we can see to start off, the institution of the family has been discussed by God Almighty at the very start of the creation of mankind. And you can see when we find the Quran discussing about the institution of family and the creation of Adam and Eve, so the first thing that the Quran brings up is that Adam and Eve were created to form an ideal family, and therefore we do find that in case of an ideal family, it does come into being as a result of a union between a single man and a single woman. So Adam was not created with 4 wives, or vice versa, which actually tells us that the purpose of the Quran is that a family in normal circumstances comes into being. It is initiated with the union of a single man and a single woman. Now, what happened was that over a period of time, as time evolved, as societies came into existence, this practice of polygamy was initiated, and we know that by the time matters reached the revelation of the Quran, Arabs had this proclivity of marrying several women at the same time, and this would be in the number could be any number, and of course this was something which was already in practice in the times of the Prophet when he was sent to call upon the Quraysh and for the people of the book. So what happened was that in Medina, when the Prophet Muhammad came to be at war with certain factions, and many of there were instances in which children became orphan and women became widows. So the Quran came forward with this appeal, and it said that, well, you people marry for various instances, for various reasons. It could be your personal reason, it could be any other reason. Now that wars have taken place and we find so many orphans in the society, this could be another reason that you should marry. So it basically made an appeal to Muslims to accommodate the widows in a way that they are able to look after the orphans as well. So if you want to look after the orphans, the best would be to take up their mothers as your wives, because it would be in their interest to take care of their children. So basically it was an appeal made by the Quran. But once it made this appeal, it said, now that you are going to follow the appeal or come forward and respond to this appeal, there are certain other restrictions also. First of all, dowers have to be given to these women as well. You don't think that if you're marrying these women for the cause of these orphans, then dowers should not be given. Dowers have to be given. Then it says that you have to deal. I mean, you cannot marry more than 4 in this case. And that too, if you're able to deal justly with them. So these were the conditions which the Quran made at the time when these verses were being revealed, that as an appeal to Muslim men, that they would like to accommodate women who had become widows and children who had become orphans in their societies, and this is something that they should do. So it, in fact, was like a program of rehabilitation for children who had become orphans and for women who had become widows. So the Quran actually took advantage of this pre-Arabic, pre-Quranic custom, and it said that you can use this institution, but then it must be confined to 4 wives. It must be confined to the fact that even for this noble cause, in which you are marrying just to patronize these orphans, even then you must take care that justice has to be administered between the wives. And of course, by this you mean you have to deal justly with them. It doesn't relate to one's own emotional inclination. You could be attached to a particular wife more than the other. That's a separate thing. But as far as the legal rights are concerned, they have to be equal amongst all wives. And then it said that you must give dower. Don't think that if you're doing a noble cause, then you should not give dower to such women. No, you have to give dowers even to these women. So in other words, the point that the Quran is making is that people do marry for various purposes, and if they would like to marry for various purposes, this is another option that it has given. And we know that the Prophet himself took lead when the Muslims were asked to marry these such people and patronize these orphans. So he married Hafsa, who had become a widow, and he married Salama, who had also become a widow. And both of these women were married by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in order to maintain their families and in order to support them. So, if you analyze all these verses, you will come to know that as far as marrying more than one wife is concerned, the Quran neither encourages it. I mean, it doesn't at all say that it is the need of a man, nor does it say that you should not do it. It just allows it. So, allowing something does not make that thing an obligation, which most people have understood. It's just an option which is given to people, and which tells us that men can marry more than one wife for any reason that they would like to, including the reason which the Quran has itself stated. So, in cases of in other cases, for any other reason, for it could be any personal reason, a man is allowed to marry more than one wife. And as I said, the Quran has made it conditional. Although this particular thing has been made conditional in the case of an orphans, the Prophet himself said that if in the case of orphans, the Quran has limited marriage to 4, then in all other instances also, or in all other reasons also, Muslims should not go beyond this 4 digit. And this is what actually happened. So this is how the background of polygamy is in the Quran. It is not encouraging people to marry more than one wife in any way. It is just giving an option. As far as the Quran itself was concerned, as you can clearly see, that when a family was initiated by God himself at the time of inception of mankind, at the time of the creation of mankind, you can see that it was created from the union of a single man and a single woman, which tells us this is how an ideal family comes into existence. But because of any social issues that might arise, any other issue that might arise with a person, more than one marriage is something which is allowed by the Quran. Now, of course, the counter question which generally arises as a result of this argument is that if men are allowed to take 4 wives, why is it that wives are not allowed, or a wife is not allowed to take up 4 husbands? The answer to this question is in the structure of the family in which the Quran has actually envisaged in itself in Surah Nisa. And that is that it says, because of certain reasons, men have been regarded as the head of the family. And since men have been regarded as the head of the family for certain reasons, which we can discuss, so therefore, if a woman is to have 4 husbands, she would be under 4 heads of the family at the same time, so to speak. And this, of course, is an unnatural situation or an unnatural state. You just cannot be answerable, or you just cannot be a person who is under 4 heads at the same time. So this is the reason why the Quran has not allowed polyandry. Polyandry means having more than one husband. And I think this is something which does not relate in any way to the DNA test, which most people think that perhaps one of the reasons because of which more than one husband is not allowed is that you would not know to which husband does a particular child belong to if a woman has multiple husbands at the same time. So that is not the argument here, because of course we now know through DNA tests that we can clearly identify the parent, we can clearly identify the father. So that is not the argument, or not the line of reasoning that is being offered here. The line of reasoning, as I said, is very simple, that as a head of the family, you just can be answerable to a single head of the family. And if you have multiple husbands, that would automatically mean that you're answerable to multiple heads of the family, which of course is an unnatural state. And that is why polyandry is something which is not sanctioned by the Quran. But the bottom line is that as far as marrying more than one woman is concerned, it is certainly not a physical need. I mean, it's not something which every man by nature needs, so to speak. There could be people who would need more than one wife, then that, of course, could be a legitimate reason. But it is not that the Almighty is telling us that every single man born on the face of the earth is compulsively someone who needs 4 wives. This is not the case of the Quran at all. The Quran is just presenting polygamy as an option, and that too, it has made it conditional to the conditions that I've just described. And anything which has arisen other than that is because of a misconception. Another thing that I'd like to clarify before I open up the house for your questions is that people often think that if marrying more than one wife is going to create a nuisance, as it does mostly in many Muslim cultures, especially third world countries and especially the eastern part of this world, if there is a condition imposed on the consent of the first wife to marry another wife, I would say that it is perfectly in line with the Quran. And if there is this condition imposed in any Muslim country in which the consent of the first wife is made mandatory on the husband, it is in line with the precepts of the Quran and with the social set of the Quran. Because you see, one of the things that the Quran wants is to protect the family which has already come into existence, and to protect the society from any form of disorder. So if there is a disorder that is going to arise because of the second marriage, which we know does arise, because in most cases the first wife does not accept the second wife, and the children of the first wife, they also don't accept a new mother, so to speak. So as a result, to safeguard this whole matter, to protect this and to not let things get out of hand, if there is a legislation in which second marriage is made conditional to the consent of the first wife, I think it is perfectly something which is admissible, which can be followed. And I do think that in case this such a law is made, a lot of questions or a lot of problems which arise because of multiple marriages in many Muslim societies would be actually put an end to, because only in those societies will this take place in which the first wife wholeheartedly welcomes the second wife, and this would ensure in most cases a healthy family atmosphere. So I'm now open to questions that you might have on this topic or any general aspect of Islam.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shehzad. First question is from Mariam. Mariam, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I just wanted to clarify for the last point, because if there's no set rule in the legislation, can you make that a rule if you're in your marriage contract, for example?
If there is no such rule, firstly, you could make this commitment with your partner in the marriage contract. That's also equally possible. And another thing which is possible is that a country can legislate, and it can actually pass this law, enact this law, that in all cases, a second marriage should be subject to the consent of the first wife. So it could be both ways. If it is not it's not been passed as a law in the country, then you can always have this contract between your husband that if you would like to marry again, then you'll have to seek my consent. So yes, this can be part of the marriage contract as well.
Okay, so if there is no law or a contract, then a person is free to do as they wish, right?
In that case, of course, there will be nothing to sort of make it mandatory upon him to not to do so.
Okay, and I had like another question, but should I wait for the next round, Dr. Yassin?
Well, please go ahead.
Okay, so when you were talking about the head of the family, as per the Quran says, being a male because they're bringing in the money and taking care of wife and children, if a woman is in that position where she's the one earning and running the house and the man isn't doing that, so like he's taking care of the children, what happens then? Or is he still the head?
I mean, he's still the head, because you see, the Quran imposes two conditions. It's not just one condition. It's not just a financial arrangement for which he's responsible. So the Quran says that الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. These are two conditions. One of them is that generally, I mean, again, this is a general rule. It's not there could be exceptions. Generally, men are more suitable for this position as heads of the family, temperamentally, physically, emotionally, all those things. And the second condition is that they are financially liable for their family. So these are two conditions. So both these conditions, I mean, one of them can be met, because if the wife earns, that condition is waived off. But when the Quran says bima faddalallahu ba'dahum ala ba'd, which means that they have been given more, I mean, they are more appropriate for this, then it is speaking of them as a gender, I mean, as a general concept. There could be exceptions to that, and that those exceptions can be dealt, I mean, case to case. But generally, the Quran tells us that the characteristics that men have make them more suitable as heads of the family. I mean, this is over and above their financial responsibility.
Okay, so even in the case if those exceptions are there, polyandry would still not be an option.
Absolutely, because you see, polyandry is something which is going to undermine the whole concept.
Many thanks. So we'll go on with further questions. And if you have any unrelated questions, please raise your hand and we can take them one step at a time. So first question would be from Abdul Rahman. Abdul, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. The question is about the. I have read something about the funeral prayer of the Imam Shafi was led by the a woman, Sayyida Nafisa. Is it a fact or just a slang statement?
I'm not aware of that, but I can try and verify it for you. This is information to me as well.
Sir, the second question is about that it's a point of reservation is that when I hear the Ghamdi's point of view on that the government cannot impose any kind of law on personal nature. So how you can say that the Quran mentions about the four wives and how a government can intervene in such type of it's the personal nature of the that it
Right.
will let on the men to decide or not.
Well, if you're talking about Ghamidi Saab's view, then he also says that any law which is based, any law can be passed, which the purpose of that law should be to safeguard the society from any disorder, from any facade. So, if any disorder and facade which can result as a result of that implication, so laws can be enacted. So, the basis of legislation, if you take up his words, is that anything which goes against the life, wealth, and honor of people, and anything which becomes instrumental in usurping the rights of people and creating disorder, then laws can be enacted on that. So these are basically negative laws where they stop people from creating that negativity. I mean, that negative impact. So this is his own. This is not something which is against his own thesis. The thesis that you are referring to is that his personal. The personal thing that he actually recommends are personal positive laws. I mean, the only two positive things that you can require from a Muslim are the prayer and zakat. That is what the Quran says. This is what the Quran says regarding two positive requirements. So when we are making a law to stop facade or to stop disorder from resulting in society, these are not two positive requirements. These are negative requirements, and these are separate bases of legislation.
Sir, the question is about the a person who is I have also emailed you about the Mani named as a person as a prophet. So I think I have heard something about that he is from Iran and it's about the second century. So have you any information of the such prophet or not?
There have been several prophets over the course of centuries, even as late as 15, 20 years ago. Even today, there are people who claim. So, I mean, there's a vast number, there's a huge number of people who do so. So, you can just find out more information about them from relevant sources. Because you see, unless there is some point of, there's some academic reason to find out more about them, one generally, just doesn't have the urge to find out more information about such people.
Many thanks. So we'll do some quick questions from the chat. The question is, what is the difference between a victim and a witness in a case of a rape? Can the victim be a witness?
Yes, absolutely. The victim herself can be a witness herself. Although our own law, the classical Islamic law does not allow it, but if, according to my understanding, the witness, the victim itself is perhaps the best witness in this regard. And to couple with that, we of course can use any DNA reports, which now prove beyond doubt that, she was the victim.
All right, sir. The next question is, if Prophet Ilyas was a Nabi or a Rasul, if he was a Rasul, what punishment was given to his nation?
I think the Quran mentions him as a Siddiq, as a Nabi, to the best of my memory. But I think that we need to consult Surah Safat once again, where all these prophets are mentioned, because he just mentioned once. So I am forgetting whether he's mentioned as a prophet or a Rasul. But I think I do remember him being mentioned as a Nabi. But I need to reconfirm that.
Thank you very much, sir. Next question is from Rohan. Rohan, please go ahead.
Right, thank you. So my question is related to wuzu, that it is allowed to do masa over socks for 3 days for travelers and 1 day for the resident, if I'm not wrong. And the same analogy can be used for doing masa over nail polish. But does that, and tattoo as well. So does that impose the duration of 1 day and 3 days as well?
I don't think so. You see, that's a different analogy. The analogy which is being made on nail polish is not subject to time. It's not conditional to time. It is conditional to the act itself. So in the case of nail polish, because of the fact it is permanent in nature, it has that permanence. So therefore, I think that the allowance should be made as far as it remains on the nails. And once it starts to come off, it starts to peel off. Only then should the wuzu be revised, or I mean, it should be done again before putting it on.
Right, but let's say if a person has done ghusl and he has intimacy with his wife, he has to do ghusl all over again instead of just washing the main parts, right?
Yes.
So right. So let's say that the same thing happens when he has a tattoo and he has to do ghusl. How will he do ghusl over his whole body?
He just needs to do it over himself, because see, that's something that is not done on the basis of intimacy with the wife. They are two separate things. Intimacy of the wife is something which always requires a ghusl, and if that ghusl is done over the tattoo or anything that covers your body, it is just fine. Because if you have made that tattoo and before making that you have done your wuzu, that is sufficient, by analogy to what we've just discussing regarding nail polish.
Right, thank you.
Many thanks. Next question is from Ahmed. Ahmed, please go ahead.
Hello. So, sir, I was just referring to that verse that from Surah Nas 117 that I just also shared in the chat.
What's the verse? Could you read out the verse, please?
Yeah, sure. It's ये अल्लाह के सिवा पुकारते भी हैं तो देवियों को पुकारते हैं. So that actually Devia is not referring to the women's they are praising.
I mean, which surah are you talking about? It's not Surah Nas.
Sorry, Nisa. I was just.
So that is something else. This is being referred to regarding the mushrikun, the idolaters. That's related to the idolaters or the mushrikun.
It's not Devia that is like a woman, or no?
Of course it is. Mm-hmm. But they relate to the idolaters. They thought that the angels were daughters of God.
Okay, so they are
angels to be, not all of them are angels, but they regarded all angels to be daughters of God, and they had other deities as well who were female. I mean, they had female deities other than angels as well.
Many thanks. Next question is from MJ Shah. MJ, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, my question is related to the verse وَالَّذِي أَرْسَلَ رَسُولَهُ بِالْهُدَى وَدِينِ الْحَقِّ لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ. So I said that this is translated as it is not the precise translation. I am trying to recall it.
That's fine.
So I will point out the basic thing in my question.
Mm-hmm.
So वो कहते हैं कि वही है जिसने अपने रसूल को भेजा ताकि दीन हक के साथ, ताकि वो इसे तमाम अदियान पर गालिब करे. So the question is that the zamir in the ayah liyuzhirahu, so how has it been translated referring to multiple religions when it is used for only an individual case or used as singular?
That refers to the religion bought by the Prophet himself. Liyuzhirahu means that you have to, I mean, the religion of the Prophet has to be implemented on all religions of Arabia. Ala deen kulli. It refers to the religion bought by the Prophet. Liyuzhirahu, so that the Prophet makes it prevail on other religions.
Let me interject. Sorry, MJ Shah, let the teacher complete his statement before you ask us for the question.
Actually, the zamir in the end, liyuzhirahu ala deen kullihi, the last zamir.
All the religions of Arabia, كل العرب.
Sir. So is this liyuzhirahu ala dini kullihi? Is it representing all the religions?
Yes,
Yeah.
of Arabia.
So I mean, I was talking to someone in the university about the verse, and I translated it as so that it supersedes or it rules over all the religion. I translated it as singular. Then he said that you listen to Ghamidi Sahib and he has translated this verse as this, and then I couldn't explain that how this ha represents all the religions and how can we explain it.
I mean, because it says liyuzhirahu ala dini kullihi, ala
Yes,
on
sir.
all religions of Arabia, which are found in Arabia.
Yes, sir. And we can say put the question like this, that the jama of the plural of deen is adyan.
There's no need to do that, because you see, deen is something which is, I mean, it's, in its essence is the same. So if you just need to translate the verse properly. So huwallazi arsala rasulahu bil huda wa deenil haq. So he is the person, arsala rasulahu, who sent his messenger bil huda, with guidance, and with haq, with the truth, so that liyuzhirahu, so that the prophet or the messenger can make it prevail, liyuzhirahu ala dini kullihi, on all the religions of Arabia. Walau karihal mushrikun, however may these idolaters abhor it or object to it or dislike it.
Many thanks.
Thank you, sir. I will
Next
try to understand it. Okay, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if there is a problem, you can just personally write to me.
So next question is from Hamza Mushtaq. Hamza, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, I'm studying chartered accountancy, and there is a very common fatwa among ulamas of subcontinent. They say that auditing the accounts of customers who deal with the riba is haram because it involves approving of riba, writing it down, and keeping quiet about it, and not denouncing it. They support this fatwa by a riwayah that is narrated by Jabir in Muslim. Jabir says Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said he cursed the one who consumes riba and the one who pays it, the one who writes it down, and the two who witness it. And he also said they are all the same. Sir, my question is studying chartered accountancy and practicing as a chartered accountant haram in Islam?
Certainly not. I mean, this narrative has nothing to do with that. It actually relates to people, or the people who are involved in business of interest, like, for example, the banks themselves, or in certain cases where private loans are given. It doesn't relate to people like you who are professional chartered accountants or who are trying to audit the reports or the accounts of other institutions. It doesn't at all mean that you are tacitly approving of their transactions. All that it means is that you are just letting them know that according to your expertise, their accounts, whatever they are in order. There's no corruption in them. There's no embezzlement in them, and they have been maintained properly. So the certificate that you give is that they are maintaining their accounts in a proper way. It doesn't mean that you are accepting or you are tacitly approving the fact, if they are indulging in riba, that you also approve of this. I mean, it's a very far-fetched thing, and it's like overthinking, and not even overthinking. I think it's totally unrelated.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Many thanks. The next question is from Asir. Asir, please go ahead.
Sir, could you please throw some light on mahar, dower, sir?
So dower basically is this commitment made by a groom when he marries someone, that he is the financially responsible for the expenses of the family. So it's a token of his commitment, and therefore it is in the fitness of things that the dower is paid immediately, I mean in a lump sum at the time of marriage, because this shows his commitment, his seriousness regarding this commitment. It has nothing else to, I mean, it has no other purpose but to signify the fact that the husband is seriously committed to the financial upkeep of the wife, and this is his way of making the wife realize that he is going to take up her financial responsibility. And so therefore a dower has to be, it could be demanded in any amount by the wife, and there should be no shame in it, and the husband can of course negotiate as well, keeping in view his own financial stature. All this can go on, but it has nothing to do with the price of the wife as is erroneously construed, or it is a buffer against divorce, again erroneously construed. It is purely something which, I mean, which underscores the seriosity of the husband, that he has taken up the financial responsibility of his wife and family.
And sir, is there any particular time of fixing it? And also, can it be delayed? And also, can the wife forgive it?
The wife can forgive it. The Quran itself, I just read out the verse to you. But
Yes.
it has to be out of the sweet will of the wife. You just cannot force it. I mean, it has to come from her. It has to be initiated from her. As far as the time of making this agreement is concerned, it has to be right before the marriage, and it is in the fitness of things that it should not be delayed. I mean, this has to be some solid reason for delaying it, very solid reason. Otherwise, the commitment should be honored right at the time of marriage.
So because there is some confusion because of certain hadiths, scholars there argue that no, it doesn't have to be in monetary terms. It can also be some other in kind as well. Like for example, some scholars say that even if you can teach your wife Quran, even that can be this.
That is not
be a
correct,
demand.
because that is in fact based on a certain hadith which has been
Yes.
misunderstood. It has nothing to do with that. It was a very specific case and a very exceptional case. Otherwise, getting married to someone and taking up the financial responsibility is a serious affair. It's a fiscal affair, and it has to be dealt with in a manner in which the wife feels secure and protected. And she can only feel secure and protected if it is done in the proper way. And when you say kind, yes, I do accept that. Kind could be that he could give the house to her, anything which is an asset. It doesn't have to be currency, but it has to be something which relates to her ownership.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Facebook. It says, how can we say that in the issue of half testimony of women, it is a Sadezariya ruling? Is it Quran supposed to be relevant till the day of judgment? And how can we just say it was supposed to be for that specific time and cannot be applied now?
This is because if you study the Quranic verse from where it starts off, it tells you that it is dealing with the Arab culture of those times. It tells us that the person who is responsible for writing it down is the person who is acquiring that loan. It tells us that the background tells us that there were very few people who could have written down these transactions. So therefore, witnesses who are called upon and people who are called upon to write it, they must not refuse to do so, because this is something that they are helping out their brethren. And the end, at the end, you can see it says zalikum aksalakum aksatu indallahi. It's the words to the effect that this is more efficient. I mean, this is something which is more likely to maintain that contract, that security to that contract that you make between yourselves regarding that loan. So the entire verse is actually telling us, or speaking to the Arabs of their times and giving them a certain advice. So this is found within the verse, that it tells us the way in which people were actually acquiring loan and they were not writing them down. And the second thing that you might also consider is the issue of collateral, which in the times of the Prophet, it was not possible. So you see that the verse right after this, right after these verses, we have the issue of the collateral being discussed when a person is on a journey, and in that journey he needs to offer that collateral for a certain amount of loan that he should offer it. Again, you can see that today these journeys are not of the same sort in which we would not have collaterals. So the nature of that collateral itself being given on a journey tells us that it was specific to those circumstances, because in today's circumstances, this has become virtually possible. So I would say, all in all, if you see all these things in the verse, they give a very strong reference, and they make a very strong case of the fact that it is nothing related to law. It is actually related to one's social dealings.
One more question. They need some clarification that why is it that you can do subsequent wuzu over socks for only one day, but in cases of tattoos, you can do it forever? What is the difference between the two? What is
because I think a sock can be easily taken off, and a tattoo will take a lot of time to take off and then do it again. I think this is something in the fitness of things that and ijtihad has to be exercised for the convenience of people. So you can easily, I mean, take off your socks, but is it the same in the case of your tattoo?
Understood, sir. Next question is from Arif Khan. Arif, please go ahead. The question is, what will happen to animals on the day of judgment? Is there any concept of accountability of deeds or hell or heaven for other creatures than human beings and jinns?
No, I think the Quran is absolutely clear that the accountability is going to take place for people who have the free will to do something and who have been blessed in a certain way by the Almighty to have their own way, what we call ikhtiyar, to have the freedom of doing something, the freedom of will. And this, of course, is something which animals do not have. And the Quran is absolutely silent about them. And I think common sense also tells us that that in species who don't have their own will to exercise and who also do not have any awareness of good and evil the way human beings have, they should not be held accountable.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from Ahmed. Ahmed, please go ahead.
Sir, I have again question about from Surah An-Nisa about the law of qatl khata. If someone kills some other Muslim in a war by mistakenly, is this lies also applicable right now? Because right now war is not going to happen. But the thing is with the policies of our military or our government, if somehow in another country or in our country, if some Muslim is killed mistakenly, is still this law is applicable on them? Because
Yes,
right
of
now
course, it does. Why shouldn't it not be applicable? It is still applicable.
How they actually going to free a slave?
For that, of course, as I said, this is the case with other issues as well. I mean, with other crimes as well. So the scholars have done ijtihad on this, and they say that it is analogous to release those prisoners from jail who do not have any money to get themselves bailed out from jail, and who, because of any lack of money, are languishing in jails because there's no one to spend the money to have them bailed out. So freeing prisoners who are just there because they don't have enough money to bail themselves, the same money could be used for that purpose.
And one more thing, sir. Sir, actually, you don't think this actually law is forgettable, because actually we are now making policies without actually considering this law. Because if we make most of the policies, actually, in most of the people actually got killed or somehow murdered, even Muslims too. But the thing is, this law is actually not actually in front of the media or all of the stuff.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand your question.
Yeah, the thing is actually this law is actually forgettable, I think, because in most of the policies of our government,
what law is
forgettable is not applicable, sir. It's not applicable. Yeah, right now, because
Why
most
not?
of the police, because most of the policies of the militaries, most of the time they are going to do some cold wars, all of the other stuff. Most of the Muslims going to kill or murder or some of the stuff. But the thing is, even not is going to ask some question from the government or from the state, or you cannot ask question from the state that you actually killed a Muslim, and this is the law in the Quran that you have to pay a diyat, or you have to free a slave, or you have to do another stuff.
I think it would be better if you could get in touch with me personally, because to be honest, I have not understood your question fully, and it may require some more discussion. So you can always get in touch with me.
Sure, sir.
Many thanks. We have one question from Facebook, Wasima Rahman. She says, do we need to avoid leasing a car on a small amount of interest, or is it allowed?
So we have discussed this on some other occasions, that as far as mortgaging and leasing is concerned, it is absolutely fine, because you see, in this case, you are paying interest, you're not charging interest. What has been forbidden in the Quran is charging of interest. And as far as paying of interest is concerned, it is only forbidden once interest has been outlawed in the society. So you see, there are two types of societies. One in which interest stands as outlawed. In that case, paying and charging of interest, both is disallowed. But in societies, as was the case in the times of the Prophet, when interest was in vogue, only the charging of interest was disallowed. As far as paying interest was concerned, the Quran never proscribed it. It never prohibited it. Yes, once interest was regarded to be outlawed, it was totally eradicated from the society. It was only then that this was in vogue. So today, because you are living in a society in which interest is something which is still in vogue in almost all societies, so therefore, in this case, if you are leasing or mortgaging, it is absolutely fine, because in this case, you are actually paying interest, you're not consuming interest.
Many thanks, sir. We have 6 minutes left, and we have 3 questions for now. Rohan, please go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, is plucking eyebrows permissible in Islam? Because I read a hadith about it, but many people say that it's fine to pluck them.
It is just fine to pluck them. There's nothing wrong with them. There is a narrative which has been wrongly interpreted. A certain word which is called tanammus. The tanammus word has been interpreted to mean plucking the eyebrows, whereas it is actually a particular hairstyle which the Arab women used to adopt in the times of the Prophet, and they would make a certain design which would look very, unnatural on their faces, and they would just draw their hair on their foreheads. So that's an entirely different thing. As far as plucking eyebrows is concerned, is absolutely fine.
Right, and similarly, there is something related to teeth. So can you wear braces, etc., for purposes of beautification?
Sorry, I couldn't get your.
He is asking about the braces for
the braces
work.
That's absolutely fine. If you wear braces, this is because of a medical reason, to set right your teeth. So I don't see why people think that braces are disallowed in any way. They are basically a means of treating your teeth.
Right. The same hadith or similar hadith tells about women who make spaces between their teeth for purposes of beautification. They have been kind of cursed, I guess, if I'm not.
No, that's an entirely different thing again, and that hadith has a different meaning. It doesn't relate to any sort of beautification. In most, in these narratives, there's one thing which has to be presupposed, and that is people are trying to deceive someone else through a certain appearance that they might not be actually having, and giving this deception, so that, for example, in the case of a marriage proposal or some other age-related thing, the other person is deceived in that. So it is not just plainly beautifying yourself; it is beautifying yourself or altering yourself in order to deceive someone. That is in question.
Thank you.
Many thanks. Let's go ahead to the next question. Mr. Hasid Faisal, please go ahead.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. So my question is is it sufficient to only do the obligatory aspects of wudu, and would it be sinful to neglect the sunnah aspects?
Yes, absolutely. And that is the minimum wuzu that the Quran has prescribed. So if you don't do mazmaza or istinshaq, which means rinsing your nose and your mouth, that is fine. But you see, there has to be some reason. For example, if you're in a hurry or you're not able to do it, that is fine. And the minimum amount of wuzu, the minimum amount of body parts that need to be washed is just fine. What is over and above that is recommended whenever you have the time, which we often have, unless we don't have it. But even if we have the time and we don't do it, you'll not be held liable to it because they are not obligatory and they're not mandatory in nature.
Okay, and just a follow-up question. If, let's say, I wash my hands with soap and then I'm doing wudu and I can taste soap while doing wudu, would that render my wudu invalid? Especially if they're...
No, certainly not. Why would it?
Like, let's say the soap has, ingredient from pig or something like that.
That doesn't matter. Ingredient from the pig is disallowed for consumption, for oral consumption. You can use pig items for perfumes for any other reason. Could be cleanliness, could be any other reason. This is another big misconception, and I think needs to be clarified that as far as swines are concerned or pigs are concerned, their oral consumption or consuming them as food is disallowed. It doesn't mean that they cannot be consumed for other purposes.
So it's okay if you accidentally swallow like shampoo or the lotion is absorbed into the skin.
Accidentally anything is allowed. Even if you're consuming the meat of a swine accidentally, the Almighty has given us this assurance that nothing done with intention or something done with intention is always liable. But anything which is done without any intention is never liable before God, because it's just a mistake. You never intended it to do.
Okay, so just one final question. So would it be preferable to refrain from toothpaste with pig, like just because the chance of consuming it is higher? But
I wouldn't say. I think it's totally all your choice. There is nothing which prohibits it in any way. It's entirely your choice. And I don't think we need to go into these nitty-gritties.
Okay.
Many thanks, sir. We have 1 minute left and we can only take one question. A for Imtiaz, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. You have said earlier that government can restrict or limit polygamy to prevent any possible nuance. Does this principle can also be extended towards other Quranic laws? For example, if government wanted to ban capital punishment for a while for some greater good, can government do that?
You see, such laws can only be enacted when there is a chance of disorder. So you have to prove that some disorder, some evil, some facade is the result of that. So it's basically against such things that laws have to be enacted. Capital punishment is an entirely different thing. It is a punishment which is given in lieu of killing someone else. And there's no reason to put it in abeyance unless there is some very exceptional case, which hardly is the case in most cases. So these two are entirely different things. So capital punishment is something which eradicates disorder and evil in the society if it is administered in its right way. Whereas the thing that we were just discussing, it creates disorder. I mean, if you marry more than one wife without the consent of your first wife, it is likely to cause a lot of problems from the first family, the children of the first family, the first wife. So I think the two are diametrically opposite.
Many thanks, sir. We are out of time for today. Thank you so much for a wonderful session, Dr. Shehzad. Any ending words from you?
So thank you very much for being with me and bearing with me. So I do learn a lot from your feedback, the questions that people ask, and do hope to continue. Maybe we would have one or two more sessions, inshallah, and complete this series. And I do hope that if it hasn't answered your questions, at least it has tickled your mind to find out more. And remember, it's not the answer that matters as much as the effort put in to find out the answer. And that is something that is an ever ongoing process. So thank you very much.